Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rossi from Italy. I will share with this webinar this afternoon with my dear colleagues from Portugal, Inês, Reis, and from UK, Jenny Kingsmill. We will try to give a brief report on how to tackle the S in ESG. Means it is quite a famous now and interesting name of some certain activity and some certain social attitude and that we face today, we face every day. I will try to introduce a little bit, and I will give some words and some question to my colleagues. I will be more than happy if you. We will be more than happy if you can have a question to at the end of the speech. So in today really impressively dynamic and globalized world, where namely after the pandemic stopped, where social awareness has more and more increased, the role of corporation and companies and their position towards customer and employees has changed radically. I think it's an experience of every companies, and as you as HR or legals from other companies, that really changed the image of the companies, not just in a more communication and marketing approach and benefit approach, but the importance of the company attractiveness no longer depends exclusively on the turnover, on the marketing campaign, and even on the quality on the product that you or the goods that you produce. Still, this now it must be balanced with ethics, non-financial goals of the company itself. Some quite often not very clear. It's something that is very difficult to understand, very difficult to clarify, and very difficult for lawyers too, because sometimes it's more a question of perception, very linked to business and very linked to communication. An attracting company today is no longer only with high turnover, but a company that pollutes as little as possible, is more active in respecting human rights, is a very broad definition, very high definition, and treat employees in a very specific way. So not only in a way that is correct and compliant to the law, but in some way that make employees be happy to live in the company. Of course, the ESG is a very broad term. It's very open term, and E and G are quite easy to understand. For E is environmental, in the impact on the world, on the company, on the world around, in every sense that you can imagine: sustainable business, green economy, no carbon free, and whatever you think. The G is governance, relates how the companies manage the principle it is too. But exactly what is the G? What is stand for? What is S? What is stand for S? Social factors right now, until now, are at the least discussed compared to environmental and governance factors. We talk about the social standards for the company and the impact of the company on its influence on the community. In other words, it relates to respect human rights, operate in the unethical supply chains, avoid overseas labor, support LGBTQ+ community, and operates on diversity inclusion, having policy to protect against sexual misconduct, pays fair living wage. Means a very broad activity, very broad activities, very broad sense, and very open and discuss and various parts to be covered. The ESG is a rating, means it's a standard. It's not a rule. It's not a law that must be compliant. So that would make a little bit difficult for HR and labor law to understand exactly what we have to do. It's a rating, and the good positioning of this rating of the company means that the company will be more interesting and more attractive also for a specific generation, like Gen Z, that is much more interested in a previous generation on how the company behave in the world. And with from experience, and we have so lot of articles and documents on that the interesting in ESG has been inserted in one of the most critical issue for employees to enter into a company, to want to work with a company. So given this very broad amount of definition and very different initiative that you can use to insert the S to open it, to comply with the S, with the ratings. I will ask you, Inês, at first, in what direction is Europe moving? So what were the first steps taken by the European Union, if any, and in which direction?
Thank you, Leah. Thank you for asking. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar. As Leah said, this is a very broad and very, to a certain extent, vague concept, the S within the ESG acronym. And today we are going to try and clarify some of it, although we ourselves also have some doubts on how this is going to happen in the future which is not that far away, as you will see. Answering your question, Leah, European Union is in fact trying to implement certain rules for European Union member states, but those rules will set the trend inevitably to everyone else who is doing business with Europe, and we will talk about that in a moment, I'm sure. So it's not only a European Union decision or initiative, as it will impact other jurisdictions. To make it a bit more specific, we have the CSR directive, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is now in force since the beginning of this year and has been replacing an old directive on the same, or practically the same subject, which is aimed at increasing transparency on non-financial information that companies have to report. European companies, of course. The companies that are already or were already bound to provide that information according to the old directive will have to provide that information according to the new directive rules from 2025 onwards, relating to their activity on 2024. So 2024 is in 3 months' time, which means that it's really not that far away. It's now, exactly. Then the other companies, or some other companies, will have to comply with that obligation from 2026 onwards, related to the year 2025. And then small and medium companies, and this is very important, I think, to the majority of the clients we deal on a daily basis, small and medium companies, which are companies that have below the 250 employees number, they will have to comply also from 2027 onwards, related to or in relation to the year 2026. So this is still being analyzed by the European Union on how to adapt the requirements that will be demanded from these small and medium companies, but this is here, and it's not that far away. Then we have the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Reporting Directive, which is really not yet a directive, it's a project. That project has very recently been approved by the European Parliament. So now it will be discussed, the text, it will be agreed, and I think sooner rather than later we will have another directive coming forward, and this one will have impact on the supply chain, because you will have to report on your own practices, it's due diligence on your social practices, and also on your suppliers. So this, for companies who deal with other companies in terms of supply chain outside of Europe, that will pose a challenge. I think we are all thinking about Asian companies, but that's not only that. the smaller Italian companies, Portuguese companies, Spanish, Czech, they will have problems with that, although we are not talking about forced labor, maybe, and of course the standards are a bit different. There will be many requirements. I'm sure that smaller companies will have difficulties in meeting to face the reporting obligations or the requirements of this initiative, of this directive. We have also, in terms of European Union, the gender pay topic. We have a directive called the Pay Transparency Directive, which needs to be implemented by all countries until June 2026. The good news is that the majority of countries have already implemented the directive, and it imposes reporting obligations on employers on what they pay to men and women. And it is aimed on checking whether there is a gap on the hourly payments on average between men and women. And if there is, either the companies are able to explain it or they need to close that gap. So this is something that is really it's a hot topic, very hot topic. Everyone has been asking about this, I think, in the past year. But the trend is not only European Union. The UK, the US, Canada, Brazil, Australia, they also have gender pay initiatives and gender pay reporting. Actually, I think Jen will tell us the UK has a very strong practice and a very strong, very strict requirements on this implemented. And last but not the least, on the European main initiatives, we have the whistleblowing directive. It's also a very hot topic in the past year or year and a half. It has been a very hot topic. The aim of this directive is to report on breaches to the European Union law on a wide range of matters. Also, this directive has already been implemented by the majority of European Union countries, which is good news, I think, despite the usual delays we sometimes face, some more than others. But this is a clear sign that the European Union is trying to do something on the social part, that will have, as I said, an impact not only at the European Union level, but it will be broader. And I think there will be more and more to be expected in times to come.
Yes, thank you, Inês. Just a little question about that. And a comment. Can we expect in some way a specific directive on ESG, like a overall directive?
I don't know. I think it's a bit difficult, isn't it? Because it's too broad. Yeah. The environmental part and the environmental part itself is a huge topic, isn't it? So I think there will be a lot of directives on the environmental fields that will be used to be compliant with ESG. But I don't think a directive on ESG itself would be practical. And I would like to add something which is I think interesting. Euronext, which is, as you know, the platform that aggregates some of the, I don't know if all, but some of the European stock exchanges, they have a service now to consult that allows the consultation of the ESG profile of listed companies. So this is now public. Listed companies have to have their ESG profile or rank, and you can go and access that. So this is becoming more and more visible, and of course clients and suppliers and stakeholders of all natures will be able and will be more alert. They will be able to see and they will be more alert to these topics.
Yes, that is very interesting, and it's also very interesting what you said before about the fact that not only the big listed company will be interested and affected, but also the small company and even the micro company in some way. As I talk from Italy, of course, that we have a large amount of very big, very small company, and it is important to understand for this kind of company that they will not oblige by the fact that they will be the mother company because they are too small, but they will subject our supplier to a really due diligence and investigation. And maybe they must be ready, because of course they will be asked for a big supplier, a big company, a large enterprise to come. They will come and ask if they are okay with the gender pay gap, and they are not often, or not always, but often they are not. Or if they have, or they do something, but there are not enough documents, there are not enough paper to testify, to prove that they do something. So I think that it will be a lot of work to prepare, particularly on this specific directive, that it's quite interesting and quite important in the future year. And let's talk about UK then. Jan, UK is now outside Europe. We know that. Not happy personally, but ahead in ESG. What are the current critical aspects in the social, in ESG in the UK? What are you talking about? Because probably what happened in UK afterward. They come to Europe, and we manage, and we ask help for our colleagues in UK to manage new issue, new outcome.
Thank you so much, Leah, and thank you everybody for attending the webinar. Obviously, I think we can all agree very interesting conversations already happening so far. So it's great to kind of be delving into this. I think when people think about the social in ESG in England, the immediate thought when they hear the word social is going to the pub and having parties, but that's not what we're talking about. That's a different thing. And
it's not bad, but
and I think the thing to remember with ESG is that it's not just sort of doing tick box things to sort of get through. It's about looking at the whole perspective, and as a company as a whole, thinking about the ethos and what kind of things we're going to be pushing. And obviously, it was already mentioned before regarding gender pay gap reporting. In the UK, we've had this in since, I think reporting's had to be done since 2018. So a few years now that we've companies with 250 or more employees at the snapshot date have to do reporting on their gender pay gap information. They have to report on the percentage of men and women in each hourly pay quarter, the mean average of gender pay gap and hourly pay, the median gender pay gap hourly pay, the percentage of men and women receiving bonus pay, the mean average gender pay gap for bonus pay, and median gender pay gap for bonus pay. If there is a gap, just like you say, there has to be sort of an action plan and an explanation to what that is. And I think it's one of the issues is that people, and I think that you'll be seeing this in Europe as well, is that people put it off and not really thinking about it. And then suddenly they realize they've got this gender pay gap and they need to deal with it. Otherwise, they're named and shamed on the government website, which is then picked up in the media. And again, that's one of those, it's an easy win if you get ahead of it and you make sure that you're prepared and you can put the information out there. But the problem is when you're being reactive towards it, it's much harder to be able to push that. And, also we want to make sure that everybody's getting paid right and that things are being dealt with properly. And so if you're ahead of it, you're able to sort of deal with things in the right way, in a constructive way, and help change the business for the better. What becomes an issue is if you find out too late and then it's too late to be able to actually do anything substantive about it, or you're just sort of sending, big checks to women in the mail, which I wouldn't mind, but that's not how we recommend dealing with it, of course. Additionally, we've had the Employment Rights Act and the Equality Act in the UK, which sort of hold companies accountable for discrimination regarding various different protected characteristics, including race, belief, gender, maternity, LGBTQI, and also if you have a disability, and thinking about sort of making sure that there are reasonable adjustments put in place if somebody has a disability as well. It's bearing in mind that social, some people get sort of D&I, diversity, inclusion, information mixed up with social, and they are very similar, but it is also taking more of a sort of overview approach. Things to think about as well as in terms of hybrid and flexible working, where in the UK, after you've been working somewhere for 26 weeks, you have the right to apply for a flexible working, and there has to be sort of a consideration of that, and you're only allowed to reject it on certain grounds. And sort of making sure that you're up to date on those things, especially when you think about what sort of might be happening next. At the moment, those are the key things to be bearing in mind. And stuff like neurodiversity training and awareness, I think, is quite a hot topic as well. There's become obviously more of an awareness of neurodiversity, and there's much more people who are being recognised as having neurodiversity within them. and making sure that you've got training and adjustments available to support those people within the business. Additionally, mental health support. We've obviously all recently come out of a global pandemic. In a way, it feels a long time ago, but it was still quite recent, and the effects, I think you see that on people within the business as well. And so making sure that there is support available for your colleagues through occupational health. One of the things we also have in the UK is something called access to work. So if somebody has a disability, you can apply as a business to the government to get funding to make sure that you can put support in place for those individuals. The individual can also apply themselves for it to make sure that they get funding specific which works for them. And then overall, it's about having sort of empathy and understanding, and that you're going forward with the right basis and keeping things in mind.
So that's quite a lot. So I think it's quite difficult to imagine what are the next steps for UK, because of course you did a lot of policy, a lot of activity. I think a little bit more than in other countries. I don't know if Inês agree on that, but of course I think we are a little bit a step back on that.
Yeah.
And I don't know Portugal, but for sure Italy we are. And what are the next steps for UK? In fact, what we are thinking for the real future, not including in there a lot of things that you mentioned.
Of course. I think, like you said, there's so much going on, and there's always trying to keep ahead of the curve and making sure people are feeling as included as possible, and that, like I say, the right ethos is going through the companies. One of the things that's being looked at the moment is this employment rights bill. It's not been put in yet, and there has been a lot of talk around it. So we wonder if and when it'll come in and what it will look like when it finally is there. But one of the things that's being suggested as part of that bill is this flexible and right to flexible working. Instead of having to wait 26 weeks, being able to have it as a day one right. So once you first get your job and your first day in the office, you can apply to have flexible working request, which is quite interesting, because obviously if you're applying for a full-time position and then on day one you come in and ask for a flexible working request, it's quite controversial in a lot of ways as well. Additionally, at the moment, the law is that you can only apply sort of once every 12 months, or the minimum that they have to be able to allow. Whereas if they bring in this new employment rights bill in the way it's currently drafted, it will allow it to be happening, I think, once every 6 months, which again, increases the onus on employers to be able to make sure they have this flexible attitude in business if this does come in as well. Another thing that's being looked at is the right to disconnect, which I think is around in some European countries already, but hasn't come in the UK. I personally think this is quite a controversial one and very hard to legislate. But the idea around it is, obviously, when you're outside of work hours, you have a right to disconnect and you don't have to be contacted by work and things like that. Obviously, to help improve mental health, work-life balance, and all of that. But in a very practical way, I think us as lawyers can understand, sometimes you need to be available. You need to know when something urgent's coming in. And I think it's a hard one to enforce and a hard one to make sure that companies are complying with. And also on a very practical level, there are, like we say, moments when you need your employees to be working at push points. Another thing that's being considered as well is ethnicity pay gap reporting, which I think is quite interesting. This hasn't come in yet. And one of the issues around it is making sure that the information is actually going to be useful. Obviously, with gender pay gap reporting, it's quite easy. You have, the way that it's done is 2 sets, men and women, non-binary people and things like that are allowed to affiliate how they would like, but it has to be within those binaries. However, ethnicity pay gap reporting, with there being so many ethnicities, either you have to break it down by ethnicity so that the reporting becomes meaningless, or do you have to sort of make dodgy sort of putting people in categories that doesn't really fit right. And so I think that will be something that if it does come in, there'll need to be some guidance on how we're going to be able to meaningfully enforce this and make the information useful. There's also talk of disability pay gap reporting and things like that as well, which will also be interesting if that comes in. So there's clearly a lot of stuff on the horizon, but I think definitely more guidance is needed. So I suppose watch this space. I look forward to talking in a couple of years.
Yeah, so it looks like. So that's super interesting. Thank you, Jen. And Inês, and I will put the same question to both, but Inês first. And what are currently the best practice the largest companies following? So what do practically they do? Because we talk about, of course, reporting that is clear, because reporting is something that lawyers know, particularly because it's something that we see papers, so it's fine. But what are practical the things, the initiative that you face every day, or that you are planning to do with your clients in the next month? So yeah,
on the yes, you mean to increase the yes. Taking what Jen was explaining, because of the Employment Rights Bill, and Jen, I have good and bad news. We have the right to disconnect already. In practical terms, nothing has changed really, to be honest. So, and I agree with you. It's very challenging, and it's particularly challenging when you are talking of a globalized world where you have your services in one country, your payroll in another country, your sales in another one, and people have different time zones and work different hours, isn't it? So it's very difficult to implement, and it has to be managed with lots of common sense, as most things in life, I would say. So what are we seeing, I think, in European Union as trends? And I think the UK is a bit ahead of us, as you said, Leah. I totally agree. It has a longer tradition in some of those topics, but also has something which is a less strict approach on data privacy issues. So taking, for example, what Jen was saying about diversity and inclusion, I think diversity and inclusion is one of the things companies are trying to implement too, but the reporting on that is very tricky and very difficult because it poses very complicated and delicate data privacy issues, even if employees decide to reply or answer the questionnaires on an anonymous base. How anonymous can you be in smaller structures, isn't it? So that goes for diversity and inclusion, goes also for the psychological assistance that some companies are providing, or at least it can be tackled in a different way by giving support for psychological assistance, not, of course, asking anything that you cannot legally ask, but it is also difficult for employees to go and get those funds, because by doing that, they are confessing they are in need of psychological help. And this can be also a tricky matter to be out in the open. We all know that mental health is still very stigmatized, and organizations don't deal with that so lightly, isn't it? And I think the UK there has gone a bit further down the road than us in continental Europe. Some initiatives that I have seen are the hybrid work. As Jen was saying, that they will be entitled after 26 weeks. I think in continental Europe, you can apply for that from the beginning. There are even some employees who are entitled to ask for that, those who have young kids, who are monoparental families, so sole father, isn't it, or sole mother. Companies have been promoting after the pandemic the hybrid work. I think we've gone to the 80, from 8 to 80, and now we are finding our ways somewhere halfway. There are already some companies reverting the full-time hybrid work policy, because in fact teams are suffering from the cohesion in teams is suffering from that. I think this is something we all see even in our firms and in our clients' structures. So this is an initiative that I think it's very strong, or is a topic that is very strong and has a very big importance on organizations. We have been seeing some changes in the offices premises. Offices are now trying to look more like home. They have gyms, they have nice rooms where people can sit, have a coffee and work on their laptop without being on a formal desk as we were used to. Small offices, individual offices are now being less and less common. In your office, I know, Jen, there are no no private rooms. We saw them. Which is kind of strange for a lawyer, for a law firm structure. But I think also in the majority of corporations, there is a trend in continental Europe, and not only, but especially in continental Europe, that the boss has their own private room, and then the CFO has another one, and the HR has another one. This is a question of status, but also of confidentiality. So these are things that companies will have to also have a look. We are seeing, as I said, a more friendly, home-looking office. I think to address the social, the comforts that all companies want their employees to have more and more, especially because we are also dealing with younger generations and everyone wants to retain them. So the social is very important. We have seen some companies allowing pets in the office and allowing a very, I found it very amusing, which is a paternity, paw as in pets, paternity leaves. There are some companies also who have extended different leaves of absence to the ones that they had, or to the ones that are legally applicable, to allow people to get some days off, to take care of their own personal matters, to do pro bono work. There are companies encouraging sabbaticals. So I think there is a variety of initiatives that are being taken to address the yes, as you said, Leah, but it's too broad. So it's very difficult to narrow it to specific initiatives. If I do this, I will get that, isn't it? So I think it's a work in progress that companies will have to do every day.
Yes, also because creativity of the companies is unlimited. So, and the people is unlimited. This is very nice. So it's possible to imagine a very different way to increase the awareness and also a lot of charity work and charity activities and increasing more volunteers and people going and allowing employees doing, of course, charity work. That is something very common in Anglo-Saxon countries, less common, I think, in our countries. And I think also, Jan, can you list some of your initiatives that you're facing day by day?
Of course. I think some really interesting points been made by Inês, especially about office space and trying to bring people in. Additionally, you say about paternity, I've also heard it called peternity. So pet. It just made me think that I need to get another cat, though, which I'm not sure my husband would be happy about. I think in the strong businesses in the UK, it's making sure that you're sort of taking that step further. And like we were discussing earlier in terms of mental health and things like that, there's been an introduction of mental health first aiders. So not just having first aiders who are there if you fall over or cut your knee at work, but also being able to be responsive as sort of informal people to be able to go to that aren't HR or partners in the business. To provide another space for people to be able to speak, which I think is really useful as well. I think also having enhanced policies from family leave, miscarriage leave, menopause leave, period policies and things like that are also really key things to be bringing into the business to make sure that people are being looked after throughout their whole careers and their lifetimes. It's very easy to just default to statutory, but actually the statutory provisions are not enough. And I think that it's important that you're making sure you're looking after the whole of the business and thinking sort of outside the scope, things like there being sort of domestic abuse policies and things like that, so that if you find out that somebody is going through a time, that they can make sure they have reporting and places to look out and make sure that they can take time off to be able to suit that as well. I've also seen businesses have training on how to look out for people if they seem like they're not doing so well, what the signs are of mental health problems or, like we say, abuse at the home. I think this was especially crystallised when there's been so much more working from home recently. And with hybrid working, it means you have to be even more alive to what's going on when people are at work, but they're at home, what's going on in the background, which I think is very important and also very interesting. I also think when it comes to having a stand on social issues, that's a really key thing for people these days. We see it all the time, you know, when it's Gay Pride Month, you've got lots of companies sort of pink washing their flags and being in support, but it's making sure that it's not just lip service, that you're actually standing by. Because if you outwardly say, you know, we support, you know, LGBT or some other sort of diversities, but then internally you don't do that, it can be very seen as hypocritical and not actually flow throughout the business. And I think then you're sort of opening yourself up to criticism quite easily. And additionally, the places where people want to work, it's having that kind of awareness that they're going to stand up and, having networks with lead stakeholder buy-in. So, having an LGBT network or a faith network or a race network, which has got partners involved if you're in a law firm or managers and things like that. And then if you're unsure about an area or there's a new thing that's coming in, making sure you're leaning on those networks to get advice onto how to navigate such issues. Another thing that's quite important is obviously there's been a lot of discussion around trans rights. And I think it's making sure that we're looking after our trans employees and our non-binary employees. Just because in your mind that you don't think that there are any in the business doesn't actually mean that's true. Firstly, people might not feel comfortable coming forward about that yet. So you may need to make sure that there is a space for them to be available to. But also you need to make sure that you're a business already that allows people to feel comfortable becoming themselves and bringing their true selves to work. Small things like having gender neutral bathrooms, having transition policies in place already and kind of being ahead of the curve with it, I think is very important. Instead of sort of, again, being reactionary and just have someone comes forward saying that they're trans and then having to respond to that, making sure it's a place for them already having stuff in place to work with them. I think especially with transition policies, it's making sure it's based on the individual and being flexible with them, because it's a journey that they're going on and they might want to try different things and things like that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't still have a written policy to be able to assist people. I also think reverse mentoring is a fantastic thing that I think companies need to be engaging with so much more. Reverse mentoring can be, junior colleagues speaking to higher colleagues, but it can also be people from different backgrounds, races, social classes, LGBT speaking to non-LGBT and things like that. And I think you learn so much more creating that open community and communication from both sides of the coin. And I think it can be such a powerful way in a business to listen and find out what people want to be able to move forward with. And then additionally, I think it's worth mentioning having things like mindfulness, yoga, private medical, which covers transition, employee assistance programs, which people can speak to that covers things like LGBT people specific issues, and making sure that you're kind of thinking in a sphere, not just thinking, okay, this will tick this off. We've got this. We've got private medical insurance, but actually private medical insurance doesn't cover half the things that you need it to cover, and it's not actually useful. And just trying to make sure that, again, you're taking this holistic approach.
Yes, I think, thank you, Jen. I think this is the first takeaways from our webinar, that is not a unique road. There's no unique path, and if I do, diversity inclusion, that's enough for my ESG. It's also because there's not a checklist that to be compliant or not. We are not advising clients to be compliant to something, in fact, but we advise clients to check if they already do something, because maybe they do and they just not reporting, or they do not know that somebody else is doing a different division of the company, and the all things is a never-ending list, because of course there are a lot of activities they can sum up, and so I think the first thing that really there's not enough, or not a unique road, and it's not enough to say, okay, I have mental awareness week, and that's enough. That is quite interesting. And before asking for a question for others, I have a question concerning labor lawyers, employment lawyers. How we can operate, how we can help clients based on your day-by-day activities, as youth laborers, as employment lawyer in our countries, and what could be our help, what we do for clients for that. And I don't know if what practically do, because that's quite interesting. Inês?
Yes, I can start listening to Jen talking about, for example, the leaves, the paternity, the miscarriage, in the UK, that's a bit different, isn't it? Because it's more on the initiative of the companies. In continental Europe, on the contrary, we have all of that in the legislation, which doesn't mean that people comply with it, or that the employees are very happy with that. So, and I think that many times people don't even know that they exist, some of those leaves, or that they can use, or that they can use them, sorry, or that if they use them, they will not be given, you know, the wrong eye saying, this person is using this and they are taking advantage of this. So having policies implemented, although they are foreseen in the law, those rights are foreseen in the law, having the policies implemented, stating that these rights exist, that people can use them, showing an open culture from the company, that the company will see the use of these entitlements as a fair right and not an advantage that people are taking on themselves. I think it's something that we can help clients do, of course, as well as advising on the practical and the legal issues with the gender pay, with not with the ethnicity report, because we are not allowed to do that, but I'm sure Jen will suggest that for the UK. But the advice on the various issues that we have been discussing here are, I think, most of the questions that we answer on a daily basis to our clients, isn't it? Even if the clients, when they are asking them, are not aware that this is part of the S on the ESG. So as you were saying, Leah, probably many of the people who are attending the webinar have it in their own companies.
They already have,
yeah, but it's not systematized, you know, as ESG or S within ESG initiatives. So it's something that the company does because either it has to or it wants to, but it's not in a systematic, it's not treated systematically to showcase that they are complying or that they have a significant high rate in compliance with ESG requirements.
Yes.
Jen, I think in the UK, it's much more that you can do.
Yeah, it's quite it. And also, if I can add a small personal that happens to me recently, sometimes they already have policy, but they are not updated because maybe there are some very interesting policy that was, and the client's very happy and said I did it 10 years ago, but the policy is not updated, so it doesn't look good as it is, in fact. And this is something that we help clients to do. And Jen, also, I think it's a matter of updating and policy, of course, and additional things.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a very good point. People will draft these policies and then not think about them for 10 years. And, you know, the law obviously changes in that time, but also so does to society, so do the needs and requirements. I mean, if you think about, you know, a policy that was written before COVID to a policy that's written now, there's a lot that's changed in that time. And I think policies, I honestly think that companies should once a year have a day in their diary to review all of their policies. Because if you're reviewing it every year, there'll be very little changes that need to be done, and you won't have to spend loads of money on us. Though we're obviously happy for you to. But it's also, so obviously we can review your policies, we can update your policies, we can set up sort of whistleblowing functions and things like that to make sure you have the internal support. But it's also, depending on what kind of assistance your company needs, we can help reformat and your whole company ethos. We can do investigations with you. We can work out where sort of negative attitudes are coming from and help you sort of recalibrate your company so that it has got the S side of the ESG and making sure that it's got the inclusion and diversity that you need to be able to move forward. I think some companies, you know, they have a bad history of lots of negative things or lots of claims happening, and sometimes you genuinely need an outside resource to come in and help work through where these issues are coming from. Sometimes it's, you know, having little sector groups to talk to different areas. Sometimes it's manager training. Sometimes it's much more about awareness and what other things they need to be able to be bringing in to keep on top of things. Do people actually, like you were saying earlier, can people actually feel that they can come forward without being sort of discriminated against or that they're going to be victimized? I think all of these things are so very, very relevant, and things that all lawyers can assist with to help move forward and, you know, have creative solutions that don't always cost or break the bank to be able to help people with. Sometimes it's very quick, easy wins that you can do that make a big difference in a company. Law firms can also, and one of the things that we do is sort of assist with gender pay gap reporting. You know, we can do that from, you know, if you can bring us into your company and we can do all of it for you if you want, or we can just advise on little points of it. It's one of those things that you don't want to get wrong. You want to make sure that you've got all of the information at your fingertips, but it also takes a long time to collate. So another thing that is very helpful to be sort of instructing lawyers on and having helpers with that. And then naturally, as you kind of both have aligned with, we do just provide advice day to day on all these issues. You know, sometimes it is just a day by day HR, suddenly a request comes in, or they've had an issue that they haven't had to deal with before and they'll come to us. And so things that you think are novel, we're actually dealing with all the time and things like that. So never be afraid to reach out to one of your lawyers just to sort of pass the ball around and see what's happening. I think sometimes it's easier just to have a quick conversation, a quick coffee, and then you know what's going on and you can move forward in the right direction.
Yeah, and training, because we do also training, because of course we do some training on awareness, mental health awareness training, mental harassment training. So it's something that it helps to have this kind of thing, not a mere report or mere policies. That's something that it's good, it's already a piece, but it's not something that change the culture of the company and change the culture. And notwithstand, if to change the company or the culture of the company and the people working that is, you know, better than us, I think you need to train people to understand why we are doing something. So just before, let's see if we have some question from the audience. I want to just to have two or three takeaways from the today webinar. First of all, ESG and also F is investing is used and to screen investment based on corporate policy and to encourage companies to act responsibly. So we have funds, brokerage funds, mutual funds that are looking at you and looking if you are compliant or not. S, ESG, and F particularly is also fundamental for attract and retain young people and people in general, but particularly Gen Z people. And also, this is not a unique road. It was another takeaway from today. It's not a unique road, but varies and lists, and we can add. And the last but not least, this rapid growth of ESG has led to claims that companies have been insincere or misleading in talking about their ESG accomplishment. I'm pretty sure you have read newspaper in the late months, and we talk about greenwashing, pinkwashing, and this is something that must be considered, because it's a really marketing campaign can be very quickly destroyed by information not correctly reported in ESG reported or reported not actually true. So we have, I have a look if we have some questions. Okay, question for both of you. Are the example of KPI related to ESG, are they KPI related to social factors? Means that the company, they are thinking to structure their bonus, performance-based bonus on KPI, taking into account the S of ESG. Are you aware about that? I think it's that.
I think I will leave that one to Jen, because they are much more professionalized on that now than we are.
As we say, it's about making sure that you've got reasonable sort of performance indicators that are actually practical as well. I think it's very easy for people to say, oh, we're going to do more to do with the S in ESG, we're going to have more diversity initiatives and things like that, but not actually set in line what their goals are, and trying to think very practically and effectively about how you're going to be pushing that forward. I think having obviously groups inside the company whose focus is pushing that forward and having a narrative makes a big difference as well. I would also say, from my perspective, making sure that you're listening to your employees and what they actually want, rather than enforcing things that you think will help the company, but actually that's not what people are asking for. The key to a lot of this is having a good communication and dialogue with your employees about what they actually want to be seeing in the company as well. And that can help you form your KPIs and your ESG and diversity when you're going forward.
Yes, thank you. Another question I have to Inês, but of course it's valid also for Portugal and for Italy. What about, what we talked about that before, but what about companies that are not multinational and don't have the structure or the funds to support the initiative that you were described? That's interesting, but how you can do if you have 15 employees?
Yeah, that's a good question, Leah. In fact, we are always thinking when we talk about ESG, I think we are all thinking about pension funds, listed companies, big banks, big corporations, and as said earlier, the corporate structure of Europe and of many countries is not just of the big multinationals. Quite to the contrary, there are lots of companies with 15 plus employees or 50 or 20. So setting aside the micro companies for this purpose, I would tend to agree with Jen, which is listen to people, because I may think that one initiative is great and my employees don't care about it because they don't see themselves on that initiative, isn't it? So it's important, despite or regardless of your size as a company, it's important to listen to people, to have surveys, anonymous, not anonymous. If you are very small, a very small structure, anonymity is challenging. But anyway, let people speak up and say what they want, what they would like to see the company doing in terms of their own entitlements, various on leaves, on hybrid work, on pro bono work, on pay gaps, or on pay, not on the gaps. The hybrid work being also one of the key issues, I think. There are lots of people who love working remotely, and there are others who don't like or are unable to, or are on a violent environment, as Jen was pointing out, and they don't want to be on full remote. If the company is not able to listen to people and to tackle those who want to be in the office and those who do not want to be in the office, and sets a policy that it's for everyone full-time remote, it can have a problem, and it can have serious consequences on the social side, notably on the mental health of their employees. So small, quick wins are possible for smaller companies. Listening to your employees does not require a huge amount of funds to do. The hybrid work policy is tailored to what your employees really want and what the company is able to afford, of course. Other work-life balances work-life balance initiatives that do not entail massive spending. For example, giving those extra days for people to take care of their own personal issues, to go on pro bono initiatives, and other things, because as you said, Leah, the imagination of people is endless. So I think that if you have two different companies with each of them having 20 employees, you'll probably have 40 different ideas, isn't it? So it's really a question of listening, and then of the proposed initiatives, and of course also those that the employer is able to and willing to meet. I think that the smaller companies are also able to do lots of things and have a say in the social part of ESG.
Jen?
I think you make such good points there. And I think it's all really relevant. And like you say, about having this communication and listening. But I also think just a very small thing is that, you see these days a lot of companies, especially startups, that start off very, very small, but then quickly have a windfall. They have an amazing idea that suddenly means that they turn from a very small work company into a very large company. And then they don't know how to sort of deal with this transition. And that's when you end up seeing a lot of problems coming, because people don't know how to deal with this sudden growth in the business. And they go, oh, I've always been like, a family, a small business, blah, blah. And it's like, well, actually, you're not that anymore. And you need to be working with those times. And I think that a good way to get ahead of that is you never know when that might happen or not. And so from the beginning, having these policies in place and being careful when you're introducing things. I know that some people probably think that it's a bit going above and beyond, sort of having policies that you don't really need, or sort of providing training and stuff like that. But actually, if you start off on a good footing, it's so much less work down the line, and you'll save yourself money in legal fees and things like that if you're ahead of the game. Additionally, in terms of small and quick wins, it doesn't cost any money if you've got everybody in the office to arrange a weekly walk or something like that, or a mindfulness session and things, and making sure that you have manager soft skill training and stuff like that. That can all be done internally. I think, ESG doesn't have to be putting loads of money in the kitty for, paternity and maternity and all of this kind of thing. It can be these little things as well that make such a big difference. Sometimes allowing people to bring their pets into work and that kind of thing. It all just creates more of a soft environment that, again, doesn't have to cost lots of money. And I think, it is, like you say, being creative, listening to what people are wanting, but also being ahead of that curve in case things suddenly do sort of move forward at a quick rate. But thank you so much, Leah, Inês. I think it's been such a really great session, and I really appreciate you inviting me as well to speak with such great lawyers.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Thank you, Inês, and thank you, Boris, for hosting us. We need an action plan and for the future. And I will leave the floor to Yoshi to all the information connected to this webinar. Thank you.